All right, well, thank you so much for getting together and talking about the deal, David and Jimmy. And to recap the deal, it was a 3-building portfolio in Groveland, and it was about 197,000 square feet on 30 acres, closed for a little over more than $11.5 million. And I wanted to get together to talk about the deal, and first off, talk about how the deal landed.
Okay, well, Mr. Rainey, the seller, is a longtime client of this company, of this firm. We've done a lot of deals with him, mainly ag properties and some recreation properties. He decided that he wanted to not be a landlord anymore. He wanted to sell those properties and maybe do something else, diversify a little bit. He contacted me and wanted to not exactly list the properties. He wanted to be quiet about what he was doing. Just if we could find somebody that may be interested in investing in this property and do a deal, off-market deal is what his goal was. He had some pretty specific prices in mind, or he had a good idea of what he'd like to see for the property and expectations, and asked me to pursue that, and that's what we started doing. That's when we all got together on it.
Yeah. So, and David and I, we've been working with Legacy Capital Partners, which was the buyer for a number of years on different transactions. And yeah, so if you want to talk more about LCP and how they got brought to the conversation and ended up closing the deal.
Yeah, sure. And for those of you who don't know us, Augie and I, our specialties are a little more on the commercial side, whereas Jimmy does large land, agriculture, ranch rec, those kinds of things. So within the company, we've got different specialties. And so this was almost like us coming together from two different worlds. And actually we were working on a previous deal where I had a commercial buyer who was looking at a piece of what was ag land, and I knew that Jimmy was working with that agricultural owner. So again, in a previous deal, we were kind of working across different specialties within the company, which is one of the beautiful parts of this company. And so Jimmy came forward and said, hey, I've got this industrial off-market deal, kind of needs to be quiet, kind of needs to be a quick deal. And Jimmy and I have been working together, and we have been working together for probably almost 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so Jimmy and I had a certain level of trust, and he said, hey, go run with it, talk to 1 or 2 buyers. And Augie and I were working with an industrial buyer who was hot and heavy on Central Florida, particularly industrial property. And so this kind of checked off a lot of those boxes, and it very quickly made an offer, and then it kind of just went quickly from there.
So one of the things that I thought was fascinating about the transaction as a whole was the relationships why the transaction took place was because of relationships, but also just, with our long history with the buyers and Jimmy's long history with the sellers, and just, those two groups, and then, coming together on the day of the property tour was just, it was one of my favorite days in the business, I must say, and just really walking the property, watching their personalities come together, and just being, meeting of the minds and helping those guys, form a relationship and just making sure the transaction worked for everybody, I thought was something that was really special.
Well, I think the common theme was trust, and I think it started with Jimmy and I, because Jimmy had an opportunity with the seller that he had to keep quiet. It was an off-market opportunity, and so I think Jimmy trusted me that we would kind of go quietly to a buyer, maybe 2 buyers, not blast it out to everybody we know. And from there, the buyer had a lot of trust with us. We've worked with them for years. We've done a lot of additional transactions, and I think, of course, Jimmy's got decades of trust with his client. And so once we brought the buyer and the seller together, they kind of trusted each other because of those existing relationships.
Yeah. I mean, the Mr. Rainey, the seller, of course, we have a long relationship, but he trusts me, but he also knows this isn't the commercial industry, or the commercial end of the business is not what I specialize in, but he knows this office does. Yeah. And he knew that I had resources here to build upon, and I could, he trusted me to do it quietly, but to get help. I mean, that's what he thought we were going to do, and that's what I did. So, and that's how it worked together. That the relationship between us, that we could work together to find him the right buyer, and then of course when we started the deal, the relationship between him and the buyer went great. There was no confrontation. Nobody was trying to get one over on the other, and everybody was headed the same direction, I think.
Right, and this was an out-of-state buyer. Yeah. So when we said, hey, we've got this opportunity in Groveland with a Fortune 500 tenant, they're like, great, Fortune 500 tenant, but where the heck is Groveland? Yeah, exactly. And then when we were able to point on the map and say, hey, it's where 2 major U.S. highways meet, US 27, Florida Turnpike, perfect for trucking and distribution, they said, okay, we're very interested, can you get us more info? And then they did have to lean on us heavily for those analysis items, sale comps, lease comps, and those kinds of things.
Even though he sold his business, he retained the real estate, and obviously those were all his employees. Those were the employees that he hired, which I believe he said, I know he started with 2 men in a pickup truck, but I believe he had like 400 or so employees. By the time he sold his business. So, but to see him walk through the property and just kind of, everybody loved him. Just the culture there was really something to see that was built, and I think with culture being such a big thing on the buyer's behalf as well, that was something they really admired. All right, guys, well, I would say overall this was a very successful transaction. I think the most successful transactions is when a buyer and seller's needs are both met and everybody walks away from the closing table very happy, and that was certainly the case with this transaction. So yeah, overall great deal, and I look forward to working with you guys on another one here soon.
Thank you.
Right on.